Hello, and thank you for joining me once again for the Darren Chatter solo cast, where I read the blogs that I write to you so you don't have to. This is blog number 263, and that is entitled, "It's Not Failure, but Quitting That Stings the Most." I just finished listening to the Joe Rogan MMA show number 107 with George St. Pierre, and it was awesome, to say the least. George St. Pierre, or GSP as he is known to UFC and martial arts fans, is considered one of the greatest martial artists of all time. And to his credit, he is quite open and sharing many personal things during this interview. One of the things that Joe Rogan points out and GSP expands upon is the idea that what hurts you the most is not losing, but when you give up. When you allow yourself to give up, to quit before the mission is accomplished, this can be more personally damaging than a loss could ever be. As a huge UFC fan, I was quite familiar with all of the things that they spoke of, especially the fights during his career. George St. Pierre spoke of his loss to Matt Serra, who was a huge underdog, and this loss was considered the greatest upset of all time in mixed martial arts history. When he lost that fight, he made a couple of mistakes, but learned a couple of very, very important lessons that he shares with the audience. Number one, his ego got in the way after the first hard punch that was landed on him. He said that he was never hit like that before in a real fight, and he didn't know how to handle it. He was rocked by that punch, and he wanted to take the power back right away that had been taken from him by his opponent. But that made him more vulnerable. Without having a totally clear head just yet, he charged forward, and Matt Serra hits him with 3 or 4 more punches, and the fight was over. Number two, this loss was very, very important for the rest of his career. It taught him how to better handle getting rocked, which again, he did not have much experience with, but also that he never, ever wanted to have that same feeling of losing like that again. Now, this is not exactly in line with the picture that I chose for what this blog reflects. The picture that I chose was a motivational poster that reads, "Quitters never win and winners never quit." He did not say that he felt like he quit in that fight. He got knocked out. But after sharing that experience, he stated, and Rogan agreed, that it is more damaging to quit than to lose. I completely agree. If there's one thing I can say I did a great job of during my career as a pro racquetball player, and then in life in general, was to never quit. Now let me clarify this by saying that yes, I have quit things in the past. I have undertaken tasks that I have moved away from for one reason or another. But that's not what I'm talking about when you get into a training or competitive scenario and give up due to fatigue or lack of will or other manufactured excuses. Somehow I was able to find a way to have another gear when I needed it. If you want to listen to specific examples of this from one of my training sessions, you can click on that here and go to my YouTube channel and find the video that reads sauna sessions. It's the size of the fight in the dog that matters. That was a interesting experience, to say the least, and it's a 3.5-minute video that I hope you take the time to watch. So where does this come from? I really don't know for sure, but I can promise you that the ability is a massive advantage. I do believe that it is a developed skill and that it feeds off of itself. If you can train yourself to fight through the desire to quit once, you can do it again. Every time you do this, you increase your capacity to fight through that stuff in the future. You dig this well deeper every time you succeed in fighting through that desire to quit. We can be our own worst enemy or our biggest advocate. The good news is, in almost every case, the choice is yours. This truly is within everyone's capacity, to varying degrees, of course. Not everyone can become a champion in a particular endeavor, but I do believe that each of us can be better than the version of us from yesterday. This takes personal discipline and a willingness to bear some pain. That's really all it takes, even though that's not a simple thing. But you don't have to run a marathon your first time out. You just need to run to the end of the block, and then tomorrow run one step further. You have to build this capacity incrementally, and that may be the part that most people miss. This is where sports can play a big part in developing the skills that I'm referring to. One of the things I am so grateful for in my background is that I started out as a wrestler. Although I didn't do this for a long time, I learned an awful lot in the time I was involved in that sport, and more importantly, in my time around the sport. I was surrounded by people who developed a high pain tolerance and a willingness to bear any temporary pain for a victory that would last forever. My dad was an accomplished wrestler, and the lifestyle I grew up in reflected this type of discipline necessary to push myself. When I say push, there were times that I have needed someone else to step in and stop me. Otherwise, I may have had something bad happen. Seriously, by the time I was deep into my competitive career, I was willing to endure more pain and more suffering than many elite-level athletes, not just people in general. I wasn't born that way. I developed that skill over time, and I enhanced it to the point of it being one of my best weapons. But I wasn't perfect at this. There were times where I did give up. I quit early, or I took the easy way out. And to this day, I remember those isolated incidents and how I felt afterwards. There is nothing to be ashamed of in these scenarios if you learn and grow from them. If you can short-circuit the process and not let it happen again, then you are moving in the right direction. I left trophies on the table and goals unreached when I fell short and quit early. But the other thing I did, which helped me, was to learn from those experiences, and I did my best to not repeat them again. I internalized those feelings of failure, of self-defeat, and of giving up, and I allowed them to burn inside of me. I used this as fuel to train, to push harder. I used it to make me better. Sports are an easy analogy to use for things like this, but it applies to everyday life too. I use the same approach in my work career as well. I am willing to outwork most people to achieve what I want. There are times when you can work smarter instead of harder. In some cases, it's just how much work you are willing to do in a given time that will move the needle. In these instances, I can reflect back to the pain and suffering that I have endured before and know that this is unlikely to compare by any means. If it does, I know that I have been there before and that I can do it again. I cannot encourage you enough to undertake difficult things to build up your own resistance to giving up. Whether it's yoga, running, learning a new sport, painting your house, whatever. Find a difficult task that you undertake and then see it through, no matter what. That's what I'm talking about. These tasks afford you the daily practice to beat the resistance. That is the key to success. I wish you luck in your endeavors.